Hey guys, I'm back here with Ryan Rominger. He was on the podcast to talk about his own journey and his Kundalini awakening. It was really great, so I thought I'd have him back to talk about near-death experiences. I've read two books on near-death experiences. They're kind of a mouthful. One is called The Dead States Chronicles, A Zen Journey Through the Christian Afterlife by David Solomon, and another one called Near-Death Experiences, The Rest of the Story, What They Teach Us About Living and Dying and Our True Purpose by PMH Attawater. And I used to read the Ender website. They had a lot of people would submit their experiences, and I just love reading them. It just really connected, I think, with my heart and just like the love and joy, and even more so than my mind and trying to understand it, although that was part of it, and it was really great. But near-death experiences, reading that first book by David Solomon is kind of what jump-started my spiritual journey. After I had my awakening, the book connected with some of my own experiences and gave me the idea that, hey, maybe there's something to that. So they've always been near and dear to my heart. They're really interesting. I think there's a lot we can learn and explore about them. So, and enough from me. Ryan, take it from here.
Hi, everybody. Hi again. Thanks for having me on, Kendall. I really appreciated our time last time, and looking forward to our discussion today. Always enjoy our discussions. My own ventures into the topic started when I was a kid. Some of my earliest memories are being in this kind of otherworldly space. I wasn't sure what to call it until I started reading more and finding out more in grad school about near-death experiences, and then had the thought, oh, maybe that's what that was. And then I found out that as an infant, I fell off of a raft into the ocean off the coast of Texas, and it took them a little bit of time to find me and get me back up and resuscitate me and all that kind of stuff. And so my earliest memories of kind of being a child playing in this loving, bright, otherworldly space with other children, kind of in Greco-Roman architecture around a pond, it's still even vivid to this day. That might have been a childhood near-death experience. And that kind of hooked me. And then some other experiences we can talk about really kind of led me down this path of studying them for a number of years.
Yeah, that's great. I think we talked about a little bit last time how that early experience might have led to your Kundalini awakening and just being connected to the spirit world when you were young.
Yes.
It seems like a lot of people who have near-death experiences have more of this connection to the spiritual. It does things to them afterwards.
Especially with children, when we find that when children have near-death experiences, one of the things is this lasting effect can happen sometimes where that interest in the other side or paranormal things or spirituality can kind of get ignited and create this interest, create studying, but also can potentially instigate different types of spiritual experiences throughout their life.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think so many people that don't have these type of experiences is just like, well, we don't have any experience or way too experienced the other side, so I'm just not going to get into it or worry about it, which is fair enough. We all connect with what we've experienced in life, so it makes sense that if that's something that's not a part of your experience, then you just don't look into it too much or might not know how. So
right.
Definitely, of course, if you had that experience, that it seems to be such a powerful experience to people that it's something that they have to reconcile or wrestle with. What did that mean, and how does that affect my life? And
it's a very formative experience for people when they have it. Quite often, not always, quite often, but especially for children, our early experiences in life really impact us, especially if we have big experiences like something like a near-death experience.
Right.
So let's talk about what is a near-death experience. Did you want to get into that?
Um, yeah, I think I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I had a near death experience," and what they mean by that is like they almost died. A car almost hit them. It was a close shave of death. But I think the actual and that's fine. You don't want to like that. That's an intense experience that you don't want to negate. But I think what an actual near death experience is when someone they go unconscious and they're near death, or sometimes people's hearts even stop for a little while, and they go into an experience of a light or a tunnel, or with beings, or a life review. Basically, they're aware of something that's happening to them while their body is unconscious. You have a better way of
Yeah.
how would you just say it?
So it's interesting you mentioned close calls, right? The car that almost slams into another car, and you might have a moment of, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. And colloquially, somebody will say, oh, I had a near-death experience because they almost had an accident. Right. But some of the earliest research on near-death experiences was of mountain climbers who had fallen while climbing. And while they were in their restraints and were not too much in danger. I mean, they still always a danger when you're climbing if you're falling. But there was a actual experience that they had, which was this life review, this, even coming out of their body and having this experience, even though there wasn't maybe a moment of unconsciousness where they're knocked unconscious or, actually dead. So some of the earlier research actually points to that, those types of experiences. And then throughout the decades, we've looked at, okay, where is that spot at which consciousness leaves the body? When does a person become unconscious? When does a person flatline? These types of things have become really important discussions within the NDE research communities. Maybe less so for those people who've had the experience. They're like, I don't know where and when I was, unconscious formally, but I had this big thing happen to me. The other thing that's happened that I thought was of particular interest. Sam Parnia, I believe it was, a researcher, cardiologist, has done a lot of research in hospitals and looking at in emergency rooms when people pass, when they flatline. He has instruments up in those hospitals to see, okay, well, does the person's spirit actually float out of their body, and can they see things that are posted up there, like random number generators and stuff like that? But he also was talking about a term called actual death experiences, to trying to differentiate between those close calls where somebody might have a life review, they might see a flash of light, that type of thing, versus experiences where a person is actually declared dead at one point. You've flatlined, you have stopped your breathing, you have to go through some intervention for your biological body to continue living. And those types of experiences, and what happens when a person is resuscitated. And, resuscitation science has improved vastly in the past 50 years, and 50 to 70 years. And what happens when somebody comes back and says, you know what, I saw you doing chest compressions on me. I had this experience of something happening while I technically should never have had consciousness, should not know what was going on. Those become particularly interesting from a research perspective. But from an experiencer perspective, whether it's coming close or actual death, when they come out of their body, these are the types of reports we're talking about, right? Something is happening when I shouldn't have consciousness. A lot of people like the pleasant near-death experiences as opposed to distressing near-death experiences. The classical one is I come out of my body, I see myself below, people might be working on me, I get a sense of pull or tugging towards something else. I might see a portal or light. I go towards that. I see other people, most likely people that have died before me. And I might see a religious or spiritual figure either in the tunnel or after going through the tunnel in the light. I might have a life review looking at different parts of my life, inevitably come up against some barrier and am either told to go back or I can't go forward anymore and get thrust back. And then there's the experience of waking up in your body and going, oh my gosh, I had this experience. And trying to then deal with the changes and understand what happened and discern who to talk to. That's kind of the classical near-death experience. But we've come to realize there are lots of other ways that this happens in other cultures. There are distressing experiences, and I look forward to maybe we can get into some of those as well.
Yeah. Those are all good. I think one thing or a couple things you didn't mention is I think a lot of times people mention a cord or something that kind of connects them to their body.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's showing that they're still connected, but also separated. You could like a spiritual umbilical cord or something.
Yeah, I've heard this many times, that they'll have this experience of when they initially come out of their body in particular, kind of have this feeling of being connected, kind of like an umbilical cord. Not always the case. There's a lot of people who will just describe simply being out and going through the tunnel and stuff
Right.
without the umbilical cord reference. Interestingly enough, people who practice what's called astral projection will also have this umbilical cord type of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Just from a phenomenological perspective, I find that interesting that these two different kind of practices or experiences can have similar descriptions.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think another thing is in the life review, sometimes they'll talk about before I was born, we went back to that and like we planned some of my life or planned this is the family I would come into, or even past lives. And that was really interesting to me that even a lot of religious people that are maybe like Christians or different religions that didn't have this is part of their belief system. After they're in PE, they were just like, oh yeah, this is a thing, and now I believe it. And at the time, I was just like, wow, and that kind of helped me along the journey of believing in that. So that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, it goes back to something that you had said, I think, before we started here, which was when a person has an experience, it affects their beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so a person that has an experience like a life review, past life kind of review in that sense of what you're talking about, and then they come back and they're like, well, now I believe in this because I experienced it. Another person might not get it because they haven't experienced it, but I experienced this. So now, I just know it's a thing because I went through it. And that's particularly interesting when you start talking about changes and after effects in the conflict that can happen, especially for religious and spiritual people who are part of a religious tradition. They come back into the church and they're like, oh yeah, I had this thing. And of course I believe it. And it conflicts and it causes chaos within their own personal relationship to their church community, often causing them to leave, if that church community is not accepting of different kind of ways of looking at the world. They're like, well, I experienced it. You're telling me I didn't. See you later.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. That kind of goes with my own experiences. It's very, very tough if people don't, kind of invalidate your experience. But obviously, if that really conflicts with your own personal belief system, it's going to be really hard to digest or accept. So,
yeah, the internal chaos of
right.
coming back and going, wait, this isn't what I was taught. This isn't what I believed beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Cause an existential crisis.
Yep. And can for long periods of time. That's where often we'll see people come into therapy or searching for spiritual directors or life coaches, right? Spiritual coaches. How do I deal with this? How do I integrate this now that I've had this experience? And it can also cause relational problems. One of the studies I was working on never really got published, but I had done a couple of interviews with people, how near-death experiences affect families and family structure. So not only relationships with your children, if you've had a near-death experience, but with spouses. In the book, The Handbook of Near-Death Experiences by Holden, Greyson, and James, I'm holding it up right here, they do talk a little bit about studies that have been done with partners and how it's affected the marriage relationships, partnerships. If a person who has a near-death experience comes back and they change in a significant way, the other partner is like, is this still the same person I married? Do I want to stay married? And they can either choose to change together, or then they end up splitting and continue their life paths in different directions. It's either convergent or divergent. They either converge and continue walking this path with this changed thing, or they diverge on their paths.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think about like children that have near-death experiences and afterwards? Because I feel like it may be easier for them in some ways, that it's easier to just write off parents, be like, oh, it's just a kid, they're imaginative, whatever. And also maybe for the kid, they're not so set in like, you have to believe me that this is like literal.
Yeah. I think for many parents, easy to dismiss as imagination. Oh, he's just imaginative Johnny again, right? And talking about these different things. And so adults might dismiss, and that becomes a caution, because that does not give the child then the ability to talk about and process the experience. From the children's perspective, knowing how to differentiate that from, depending on what age, really, if you're talking about a 5-year-old versus a 15-year-old, it's a very big developmental difference. But how they process it, if they're younger, it might be part of the kind of imaginative landscape, mm-hmm. and gets integrated that way. If it's a middle schooler or teenager, then they have to start struggling with, the concrete thinking styles and abstract thinking styles, and how that impacts how they think about and process this. Oh, this might be a subjectively different reality other than myself. At a younger age, you don't have that kind of cognitive processing the same way. So it's the way that they work on it is different.
Right.
And there's authors who've talked about childhood near-death experiences. A pediatrician in particular had written books about childhood near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm. Right. So do you want to talk about kind of how this affects? Well, I guess first of all, you kind of mentioned briefly that there's in different cultures, people have different experiences, and also it's not always a light-filled experience. There's dark ones as well.
Yeah. So let me start with the pleasant versus distressing.
Okay.
So and the different types of experiences. So I'm actually going to take one step backwards even further and say, so not only did I have my experience from early childhood, which might have been a near-death experience, I could kind of put it in that category. But then in college, grad school, I started talking with my grandmother, and a significant experience I had in my life was when my grandfather passed when I was 12. And it turned out that she shared a story with me, and this has been published in other places, but she shared a story with me where she was with him in the room when he died. And she'd been staying in his hospital room. He had cancer, was dying of cancer. And she had this overwhelming sense that something was about to happen. She got up from where she was sitting. She walked over to his bed. This is the story as I remember it. Went over to his bed. And then all of a sudden she was in an otherworldly place, less kind of magical landscape, right? This very positive, effused with light and love landscape. But it was very pastoral, it was walking with trees and, on a path, almost like hiking, right? And they were walking hand in hand, and she looks over at him and sees that he no longer has his tracheotomy. He's actually wearing his hunter's garb, his hunting hat, and his hunting flannel, and looks about 30 years younger than he did, when he passed. And they're walking hand in hand, and they come to a split in the road, and he says, without moving his mouth, so we're talking telepathy here, "Come with me." And she says out loud, "No, I can't. I have to go back." And they part hands, and he continues walking down one path towards what looks like it might be a town or a city or something, kind of over a hill. And she starts down the other path, and she wakes up next to him in the hospital. He has passed. The nurses have come in. They're attending to all the alarms going off and everything because he's died. The pastor has also, I don't know if the pastor was already in the room or had come into the room, but like the pastor and my dad were like shaking her saying, come back, no, you can't leave yet. And they get her sat down, and they're starting to attend to her. And she realizes that he's died. She's still there. And this has been termed what's called an empathic near-death experience. Other stories of this have happened on battlefields where a friend gets shot and dies, and a friend next to them, feels themselves kind of lifted up and out of their body, and they see the battlefield from above and their friend next to them, and then the friend goes on and they kind of come back into their body, and the friend is dead next to them. That's been reports of that as well. So this kind of experience where a person who isn't dying goes with and comes back. And that was so fascinating to me. It ended up leading me down a path that I studied near-death experiences for my dissertation and held groups for. The groups were composed of people who had had near-death experiences and people who had not. And I wanted to study how the sharing of those near-death experiences affected both the NDEer and the person who had not had the experience. Turns out both of them changed, not too surprisingly, but the sharing of the experience changes both groups. Having the space to talk aloud for the person who's had the experience is healing and transformative. And for the people who haven't heard the near-death experience, to hear it firsthand from somebody else can be profoundly changing for them as well. So one of the people in my study back 2002 to 2004, when this study was happening, one of those individuals, a mid-40s man who had a near-death experience as a child, told his experience. When he was a child, he was on his bike, and he hit the back of a car, and a piece of that car, it was one of the old-style cars where the fin comes out the back. The fin went through his eye socket into his brain, and he's stuck on the car. And his memory is, his experience, what he reports popping out of his body and seeing himself from above. And his body sliding off the car, his parents yelling and rushing over to get him. And he feels himself, his consciousness, his being, slowly settling upward towards a overhead light, because it was dusk and the lights were starting to come in and come on in the town that they were in. So he's kind of hovering around this light that's on, watching what's going on as they load up his body and get it into a car because they're going to rush him to the hospital. And he's not feeling any pain or anything, but he looks up and sees the classical, tunnel of light receding away from him. It's going away, not toward. And then realizes he's surrounded by darkness, and he feels the darkness, and he felt an overwhelming sense of kind of evil presence and fear. He said it was the most fearsome thing he's ever experienced in his entire life. And so that fear, that darkness that surrounds him was just overwhelming for him. It was one of the most poignant things of his story. He then tries to fly down to his body and get back in his body. This is what he says. He goes into his body and he keeps slipping out. It's like he said, he can't stay in his body, was the phrase he used. He would go in and he would slip out, and his body was on the floorboards of this vehicle as they were rushing to the hospital. He obviously lived. He only had one functioning eye at the time, but he was a black belt in Aikido and had these amazing kind of peripheral sense all around him, and was very good at Aikido. But he also mentioned that because of that experience as a child, he thought he was going to hell. It didn't matter what he did in life. He was already predetermined to go to hell because of that evil presence and then the light receding away from him. So he lived a life of crime in his early adulthood because it didn't matter for him. The moral choice had already been made, right? It didn't matter. Only later in life did he kind of wake up and go, oh no, that maybe I don't want to live this life of crime. And it was in our sessions when he was actually sharing his experience that he came to some sense of balance and peace with that kind of darkness having been present for him. And that's the power of sharing these types of experiences with other people listening. But that experience points towards the distressing near-death experience. This was not a happy, fuzzy, rainbows and light and love experience. This was scary. And the after effects were negative.
Mm-hmm. When you're talking, I think one thing that's important to mention is that it seems like a lot of people, or maybe all, when they have these near-death experiences and they're kind of looking back at their body or what has happened to them, that they feel somewhat removed. They don't feel an intense emotion like, oh my goodness, I'm dying, or am I dead? They feel kind of, or like, I need to get back to my family, that there's kind of this separation and they're more focused on what's happening right at that moment, which is interesting.
Yeah,
And
but in this case, that's usually true. That's usually the narrative I hear is there's kind of a dispassionate, oh, look what's happening to my body. Oh, they're having to, shock me with, paddles, in this case, there was an intense fear that he was having.
right, but that's still kind of focused on what's happening right now. So I guess
Right.
not to say that they don't have intense emotions, but it's not about what the physical life.
Yeah, the body. Yeah.
Right,
He wasn't having feelings about his body. He was having
right,
feelings about, oh my God, I'm surrounded by this darkness.
right.
Whereas other near-death experiencers have said, "Oh, I feel this profound sense of love and connection."
Hmm.
That's more about the moment. That's not a concern for the
Right.
physical self.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I've read other stories, about dark experiences, and some people say, because there's some who just have dark experiences, but there's some who start out having a dark experience, and some people
Mm-hmm.
say, "Hey, oh, I reached out to Jesus, I prayed to Jesus, and He rescued me," or I just stopped fearing and started feeling love, and then the experience changed. So it's
Yeah.
really interesting. I don't know if it quite fits at least the Christian narrative of, you're either going one or the other. It's like they had a change in their feeling and consciousness, and
Mm-hmm.
the experience changed to more of a, if you want to call it, heavenly experience.
Yeah, and there's also narratives of a person going instead of up into the light, down, whatever down indicates here, down into darkness, and having an experience kind of in this hellish realm, if you will,
Right.
and then it changing and then them going into something more positive. Um, but you also have experiences like even Alexander's of is neurologist of being in this kind of gray or grayish brown kind of amorphous space
Hmm.
that was
Kind
really
of like an in
distressing,
between.
kind of an in-between space.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't about a light or a being that's a savior kind of um, person or
Hmm.
deity. It's that kind of the hellishness was kind of in that kind of odd in-between space.
Hmm.
Now, the other types of experiences, and this gets back to the cultural piece, I interviewed a couple people who, they were Native American, indigenous, and one of them, the grandmother, shared a near-death experience that she had, where she was going through really dark caverns, like
Hmm.
uh, I would call them coulees here in Montana, but ravines, really dark ravines and then eventually a cave, and there was a lot of darkness. There was a lot of fear of other kind of negative entities going through that. And I remember in particular kind of a fear of a spider type entity. And then she went through that, what we would maybe associate in the West as a tunnel. For them, it was a ravine and a cave into this otherworldly space. So through the ravines, otherworldly space, and then in that space had an experience and then returned. And that points to what you were talking about, the different cultural perceptions of near-death experiences. There's different
also
ways.
Heard like a bridge.
Bridges are another one. Yep. Bridges, ravines, caves. But the similarity often is I'm here, I go through something, and I end up somewhere else.
Right.
Kind of that transitional, the liminal space. And then a return. There's a return arc. Yeah.
Have you ever? I can't think of any. Has anyone had a light experience where they were like in this heavenly realm and then that went to dark? Because I don't think I've seen that at all.
I am not pulling one from memory right now. For those who are interested in more of the distressing experiences, Nan Bush wrote a book. She writes about her distressing near-death experience, and she's written with Bruce Greyson. And I have her book here, Dancing Past the Dark. Dancing Past the Dark. Distressing near-death experiences. And she talks about different types of near-death experiences in there and kind of fleshes them out a bit more. So if you're interested in distressing near-death experiences, for those of you who are listening, pick up her book. I actually have, maybe we should get into sharing resources that maybe towards the end here, but I have lots of books I can refer to and stuff. But I don't remember the going into the light and then into... Well, no, I take that back. I remember one of being in the light, and during the life review, there was dark spaces, like they were going into the different moments of their life review, and so they were in dark spaces. But that was in the context of being in the light in their life review.
Right.
And then there was... Anyway, so there's lots of different ways that these can happen, and not every near-death experience has every component. Sometimes a person just reports coming out of their body and just feeling surrounded by love, and then they go back into their body. They don't have the whole shebang.
Yeah, one aspect that I'm just remembering is that a lot of people will, after they have a life review, they'll kind of have this discussion with these spirits or light or whatever. And again, all the communication is usually telepathic. That either they're pushed back into their body without any consent, but a lot of times there is this discussion of like, hey, you have a choice to stay here or go back to your family or go back to your body and your life. But obviously, since they're near-death experiences, people always will be like, yeah, I guess I'll go back, or yes, I definitely want to go back.
Yeah,
that's another part.
Another, and this go back to cultural variance. Another thing that can happen, or I've heard reported from, I think it was Ian Stevenson and another person that was doing research in India, experiences where a person will get hit by a bus, have something, they die, and they come out of their body, they go to a person next to a river, and that's holding a book, right? And this is kind of going to Hindu mythology, kind of the cultural religious aspect. But the god of death is there with the book and finds the name of that person. So they're standing there, ready to cross over the river. Oh, you're Indra, but you're not the Indra that I was supposed to collect today. You need to go back. You're the wrong one. And then they get sent back. by the gatekeeper, if you will, the god of death gatekeeper. And so in that sense, they don't choose to go back, but they're still sent. But it was because of a quote mistake. They weren't supposed to be taken that day. And so then they wake up, and share their experience.
Yeah. One story I read, is really simple, but kind of this person goes to heaven and is talking to God, and asking God about religions and spiritual or religious books, and God said, they all have errors, but it's all about love, and that was kind of what they took from that. I was just like, wow, that was just really profound, and it's always stuck with me. I have my own awakening experience and come back and try to figure out theology and beliefs, and that's something I always take. Not to get too caught up in the dogmatism or different, my intellectual thinking and meaning making. So
that is often a belief that near-death experiences return with. The focus on love. I need to live my life out of love. For those who are profoundly changed. I mean, there are near-death people who have near-death experiences, and they come back, and there's not a lot of change. But for some people, for a lot of near-death experiencers, they come back, and there's this focus on not theology as written in a text. It's about this inner sense of love, loving thy neighbor, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. So you want to get into kind of the after effects?
Sure.
That has some people.
So a lot of again, distressing versus pleasant near-death experiences, but in the research that Ken Ring and Moody and a lot of the even people like PMH Atwater and Yvonne Kason that were doing early on, they were describing these changes that people had. And Ken Ring did a couple of studies in the Omega Project and Heading Toward Omega about what changes people were experiencing. And a lot of the classical core and NDEs is how they defined it. They defined, you've had a near-death experience if you've had these things, which did not include a lot of the distressing near-death experiences at the time. So we're really starting with the classical pleasant NDE. Experiences reported are changes in religious and spiritual beliefs, having a sense of connection to other people in the world, becoming more world-centric as far as climate and trying to improve the world. They can become less onerous individuals. They might infuse more of that principle of love thy neighbor, trying to be kind to others. A sense of having meaning and purpose in life, that there's something I'm here to do. I was sent back. And it's sometimes for some, it's searching for that purpose. They might have had it. They felt like they had it when they came back, but it was elusive, and now they're searching for it again. So those are some of the positive types of experiences, the changes that people have. Some of the distressing ones that we see are conflict within the family or marital relationships. Because if they were a jerk beforehand and that's what their spouse is used to and that's what their spouse was attracted to, all of a sudden, if they're this loving, giving, kind person, they're like, I don't know you. I don't want to be around you. Or if their kind of sense of value and purpose in life and what they want to do with their life is shifts, that can create conflict, relational and family conflict. This drive to find meaning and purpose or to relive parts of the near-death experience can also be quite distressing for some individuals. Another piece that has been discussed is the sense of wanting to get back there, wherever there was, to that loving place. I don't want to be here. This world sucks. There's all this stuff going on in the world, from politics to social stuff. I don't want to be here. And so this either striving to recreate or even in some cases becoming suicidal to try and get back to that place. Because for a number of people, the morality around suicide kind of evaporates too. And one of the people that actually the head of ASSIST, American Center for the Integration of Spiritually Transformative Experiences, which helps train individuals train therapists, professionals, life coaches, spiritual directors, how to work with these types of things. Her near-death experience, I believe, came out of a suicide attempt. So when people have these types of experiences from a suicide attempt, they go, oh, wait, the suicide, might not be the answer, but there's not the moral hang-up that I thought there was. Mm-hmm. So they come back and they're like, oh, well, I hate this place. I want to try again. And that will sometimes land people in a therapist's office, right? Along with some of these other negative or distressing experiences. It's like, okay, how do I deal with these changes and the difficult pieces of my life coming back after an experience?
Yeah. That definitely resonated with me with my own awakening and how amazing that is. And then you come down from your high and you're like, oh, regular life, and it's ups and downs, and such a profound experience that was so powerful. It's hard to reconcile, get used to normal life. So
yeah. How, when you've experienced the sacred, how do you deal with the profane and the mundane?
Right. Mm-hmm. Also, I think people report being sensitive to electronics, and some people have to move way out in the country, or I think use some crystals to kind of negate the EMF. And then some people also report having had experiences in their review about future events, or the relationship to time is different.
Time distortion and losing time and all that.
What are some other things?
Well, also, and there's actually even been TV series on this one. Children who've had near-death experiences who can all of a sudden they can see people who've passed. I see dead people. Right. The seeing or communicating with ghost spirits of people who've passed, but not just children, adults as well will sometimes have this all of a sudden a thinning between the boundaries, is how they describe it. Having that foot in both worlds, and some individuals will then even kind of have that be a part of their meaning and purpose, where they work with families as a medium of sorts, and helping deceased loved ones move on, or being working in hospice work and being a psychopomp, which is a person who, as a person dies, you kind of meditate and you help lead the soul to the other side and then come back. It's that profession. So people will have this experience of being in both worlds. But the electrical difficulties with the computers, audio equipment, that type of stuff.
Right. I think there's both they're sensitive to it, but also sometimes I think you mentioned yourself, like watches. You can't wear watches because they
I burn out watches for whatever reason. And this for me, it's which element of my experiences did that come from? Was it the near-death experience? Was it the Kundalini experience? Was it the doing energy work piece? I don't know. I'm not sure. But it definitely, after my Kundalini experience, became very, very noticeable. That also ties together this concept that near-death experiences and Kundalini experiences might be phenomenologically related in some way. There are authors who talk about, that's just going up through the chakras, the seeing the light and everything is coming out the crown chakra, and you're just having a Kundalini experience when you have a near-death experience. I don't know that to be true. I'm just reporting that is what is has been written about. Is there some similarity? Might be. Don't know.
Right. Yeah. I think my personal belief is that there's different dimensions or levels of consciousness, and um, you know, we know by changing our perspective on life, that changes how we experience life and how we feel. So we know that much. How that, if that impacts our ability to see the other side, or our experience of what we experienced on the other side, and that continues on after we die, or near death experiences, it seems there seems to be some correlation there as well.
Yeah.
Um, of course, there's a whole big conversation in the near death experience research, and people who might fight back against that, about kind of this physicalist idea or spirit idea about consciousness, whether consciousness comes from the brain and it's just a chemical, physical phenomenon, or if consciousness is something prior to the brain that you could say shines through the body.
Yeah. And your question is?
I guess. What do you think about the debate? Where do you land on that?
So, yeah, I think this is kind of a curious ontological piece. What in consciousness studies, I'm going to start here. In consciousness studies, not just with near-death experiences, but with meditative experiences, mystical experiences, with psychedelic experiences, there's a lot of different experiences where the awareness of the self seems to expand beyond our physical body. You have remote viewing research. You have astral projection types of research and experiences. The remote viewing research is particularly interesting, being able to see or experience something in a different location and have it verified. Yes, that's the target. Yes, you described it accurately.
And the government used to have a government program to do that.
Yes. Yeah. And let's put the words "used to" in quotes there.
Right. They might still, but it's not official that the public knows about.
So yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. The Stanford Research Center, the SRI, and all their experiences in this topic. But point being that there's a lot of different areas that, or even Dean Radin's work with consciousness, from the Pear Laboratories, Princeton laboratories, that consciousness doesn't seem to be wedded to biological brain matter. So there's a difference between mind and brain. That there's enough kind of weird things that have been going on that we've seen in research to make us go, it doesn't really seem to correlate on a one-to-one. There seems to be some influence beyond the physical body, whether it's awareness of or able to influence something beyond the physical boundaries of the body that you would expect. So where I come down on it is, wow, that's interesting. I don't necessarily see consciousness as wedded to the biological brain matter. Now, somebody who is a physicalist, materialist, atheist materialist would say that's all bogus and you're reading things that aren't actually there, and there's only one possibility, which is the mind and the brain are the same thing and nothing else exists. Because in that perspective, nothing beyond physical matter exists.
Right. And I think they would talk about when you die, you have this massive release of DMT from your brain, and so your brain is just simulating an experience.
Right. I mean, there's a couple different physicalist explanations. One is the DMT hypothesis. The other is an overabundance of oxygen, an underabundance of oxygen, an overabundance of carbon dioxide. Some of the studies that have been done, like by Sam Parnia and those folks who are medical professionals in medical institutions monitoring these individuals when they pass, I mean, there's even people who will die during surgeries. And so there's lots of data. They are monitoring everything, and they will come back and report, you know what? No, there was no abnormalities in oxygen level or carbon dioxide levels of it. It should not have happened in this case, and yet we have somebody talking about a near-death experience after that.
Right.
Why does that happen? Well, if the physicalist perspective is true, then it would happen every time there's a near-death experience. You would have that abnormality. It would be a 1-to-1 correlation. I'm not saying every time a person dies, they have a near-death experience. I'm saying every time there's a near-death experience, if the physical description of why that's happening is true, then that thing would be happening every time. And there's never been a clear correlation between this is happening in the body every time we have a near-death experience. It just doesn't happen, because near-death experiences happen in all sorts of different types of situations, including ones where people nearly die.
Right. And on the other side, again, people report that they were conscious or looking down while they were either unconscious or in a coma, and they report like conversations nurses might have had, or they see like a shoe that was like on the roof of the hospital, or they might even tell the doctor something about his own life that they couldn't have known. So there's been reports.
The shoe on the ledge, the dentures that are put into a particular drawer, the personal effects that are put in certain places, conversations down the hallway while family members or doctors are at vending machines, all been reported. And the medical personnel go, that's weird. You shouldn't have been able to know that.
Right. Yep. So it's pretty evident that our beliefs are that this is consciousness is something prior to the brain, the physical, and that near-death experiences, there's truth to it. So let's get into that. What would you say, because we're saying there's some different experiences and there's different ways people experience this. So what is the subjective and objective parts of near-death experiences, or how can we parse that out?
Great question. Where my mind hung up, I'm going to ask you to ask the question again here in a second, because where my mind hung up is when you said the word truth, a memory just sprung back into my memory, which was Charlie Tart said once, we were having a faculty meeting at the old Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. I was a student and then a faculty member there. And he said at one point in one of our meetings, what if this were all true? What if what we're talking about, consciousness being outside the body, near-death experiences, these loving experiences that people are reporting, what if it were true? How would we live our lives? If we accepted this message and experience as true, what does that change? How would that change our day-to-day lives? How would that change our social and cultural interactions, policies? What if this were actually
You're
true?
jumping ahead. That's my final question. Is what do these mean, and what do we take from this? So but I think that this first question leads into that.
Okay. So their question was, because I jumped immediately to that, can you restate your question?
Sure. So my question was just what is subjective about the experience and what is objective, and how do we differentiate, and can we even differentiate the two?
Yeah. So the objective is seeing the person that is either unconscious laying there or dead, that has to be resuscitated, or is visibly shooken up if they've had a near-death experience and not actually lost consciousness. The objective is seeing their physical state. Their sympathetic, parasympathetic system is out of whack because they're are in a state of shock or fight or flight. If they're conscious, if they're unconscious, that's clear to see because they're not moving. They might not have if like with Sam Parnia's work, actual death experiences, not near death experiences, you're going to have somebody who doesn't have a heart rate, doesn't have respiration. If their mind is being monitored, they might not have any electrical activity in the brain. These are all the objective pieces of that individual. Other objective things are pieces that the individual might say once they are resuscitated and come back. Oh, there's a red shoe on the ledge on the 3rd floor of the hospital, or 6th floor. I forget which one it was. And then the social worker goes out, and the nurse or social worker goes out, finds the shoe there. That's actually on the outside of the building on the ledge. That's an objective thing. Or conversations that happened while the person was in surgery or being resuscitated, and then those conversations being verified. That's objective.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, these are things that a person watching what's going on can put 2 and 2 together and see what's going on. Mm-hmm. The subjective is the story that the NDEer comes back with. Right? They say, I had this experience. That's subjective. I have memories of going here. I went and did this. That's the subjective. I had this internal experience while you all were watching my body lying there on the floor or whatever. I was somewhere else. That's the part that we can't verify from an objective, except for in those moments where they say, oh yeah, the shoe on the 3rd floor.
Right.
The sense of feeling, until we actually have all those experiences ourselves, if any of us ever do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the difference, subjective versus objective, and changes. I think changes once we move away from the experience to afterwards. Changes that we can see are changes in their motor activity, their behaviors, what they're doing. That's objective. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, they changed jobs. They're now going into a job that is centered on the environment or centered on helping people, helping others, or they've now changed churches. That's objective. Subjective is, I no longer feel connected to my church community because I had this experience, and they're not very receptive to hearing about it. They actually tell me that I'm the devil, or that the devil gave me that experience, or that I'm going to hell and I need to be quiet. And that really, so part of that's objective, them telling them. But the feeling of, I don't feel connected to this community anymore is subjective. That's internal. Right. Mm-hmm. The feeling of interconnectedness to all beings, that's subjective. Mm-hmm. The feeling of love and passion or distress, I want to get back there, that's all subjective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good stuff. I think another question for myself is, what can I reasonably conclude or take from near-death experiences, and then I've also studied other things like astral travel again, or mediums, or people channel, or like my friend whose grandmother passed away and she talks to her now. And I guess for me, what I conclude is that once you pass, there is this journey you have to take, and it seems to be pretty common again for most or all near-death experiences. You can get stuck in what I would say like the ethereal, like the earthly plane, and maybe that's what ghosts are. But you're supposed to continue the journey, and that there seems to be a continual spiritual journey after death, but also reincarnations back onto the earth. And there seems to be a lot of times relatives that are waiting for you, and they help you, and other spiritual beings, or Jesus or God. And then there is this life review, which is a little different from Christian, because there's a book of life. But it seems in near-death experiences, they say you judge yourself. You're looking at your life, and it's just what you can take from it, what you can learn from it. And you can see other people's perspectives and how you impacted them. And so obviously that's going to be hard, but it's also going to be good. You can also see the good you've done. And
Yeah.
I think that,
Now, if I can interrupt there for a second,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not always just seeing.
Okay.
But in somehow some near-death experiencers describe it is they actually feel the
Mm,
other person's side in experiences they have in their life review.
hmm
There's a case of a person who was crushed by a car who was not a very nice person, and in his life review, he describes experiencing every time when he hit other people because he was a violent person, when he beat up other people, he felt every one of those hits.
mm,
He felt the aggression that the other person experienced from him. And so when he got resuscitated, he changed his life because he was like, wow, I now see
mm.
what I was doing to other people. I
Right. It's
felt
like
it
forced
firsthand.
empathy.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a very
Um,
narcissistic way. It's, oh, if it happens to me, I don't want it to happen. But
right.
it was really more loving.
hmm And I think maybe the most, what I might say is subjective or most far-reaching that I personally take from near-death experiences is that, um, I think it's about like forgiving yourself. I mean, taking accountability for what you've done, but also forgiving yourself, and that seems to be what changes a lot of dark experiences into this light, and it's choosing to be in resonance with love um, and want the light, and God, and that seems to be the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So I put my spiritual director hat on here instead of my therapist hat.
Yeah, go for
Um,
it.
and yes, there seems to be a message of interconnectedness between
hmm
people but also between people and their environments. There seems to be this profound, infusing love that permeates I almost think of it as a pantheistic spiritual love that permeates
hmm
everything. Once we have kind of shuffled off this mortal coil, to quote Shakespeare, we sense and see this infusing of love all around us. Kind of going back to my childhood experience, that's probably why it stands out for me. Um, that on the other side, it's palpable when in a pleasant near-death experience, anyway. Um, and that if we are really wanting to manifest that here, trying to live our life as if everything around us is infused with that same love or spiritual
hmm
nature or God, not looking at it as other, not me, something to be used and abused, or someone to be used and abused, or a stepping stone to something else that I want.
hmm
No, that other thing, that other tree, that other person has that spark of love and divine in them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think too, um, the challenge is when what we might call dark or evil things happen, or whether that could be events or people and what they do, to try to still see the divine inside of them and love them, and also see experiences and what can they teach us, not just, oh, something bad is happening to me or the world, and um, how can we learn and grow from this and continue to love.
Yeah. And how is it that my orientation to what is happening is causing me the suffering? My
Yes.
belief that this person's bad or this
hmm
experience is bad is what's causing me the suffering, not necessarily the experience itself.
Mm.
I deal with this with chronic pain a lot with when I work with clients with chronic pain. Um, Chronic pain sucks. It's ever present. But can it still have a message for us? Yes. Can it still be something that motivates us to kind of on our spiritual journey? Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's about taking more responsibility for our perceptions and our feelings and how that impacts our own suffering, and how that reverberates onto other people, and how we cause them suffering. So how can we give ourselves the love and grace, and
Yep.
in that help improve our perceptions, and that in turn helps others.
Yeah, absolutely. Self-compassion, self-love, self-acceptance, as well as compassion, acceptance, and love for others.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Before we end,
Yeah.
I was going to say, before we end, I do want to mention some important books that have
Oh
shaped me.
yes, yeah, yeah. I just want to say that I just always love reading near-death experience book. I think it always connects me with my heart and my own experience, and it's always a good reminder of the bigger picture at hand, instead of getting so lost in the daily humdrum of life.
Yep. Yep. I think I've found a lot of inspiration reading near-death experience stories, a lot of hope and reconnection to my own experiences, which is really kind of nice to have that rekindled.
Mhm.
Um, but I also like listening to the research and
Yes, yes.
and hearing how people are studying these things, which is
Hmm.
why I studied it for many years. I'm not currently studying it, but
Hmm. Yeah, I think
it's
you mentioned the hope, like, hey, this life isn't the end. There's a lot more to it, so we don't have to be. I mean, I think it's important to live our life and not escape, but also don't take it too heavy. It's not the end of everything. There's a lot more out there.
right. Absolutely.
Yeah, you had a resource list.
Yeah, so some resources for those listening that are into research in particular. One of the things that I would recommend for a person wanting to get into this area, you're going to want to study some of the key seminal researchers. You're talking about Raymond Moody and Life After Life. His most recent one was The Last Laugh. He was in medical school when he started tracking these. Then you have Kenneth Ring's work, the Omega Project, Heading Toward Omega, Lessons from the Light. You have Greyson, Bruce Greyson's work, and and like I said, PMH Atwater has done a lot of collecting of stories and narratives. And the medical doctor, Yvonne Kason, who wrote A Further Shore and Soul Lessons from the Light. Some of these get more into like Soul Lessons from the Light and, some Kason's work and even PMH Atwater's, they really get into the stories, people's stories and sharing people's stories or sharing their own stories. PMH Atwater and Yvonne Kason both had near-death
Hmm.
experiences. But another key book for research is the Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, 30 Years of Investigation. It's edited by Janice Holden, Bruce Greyson, and Debbie James. Is very important. And I'll
Yeah, I had
pause
Jan
there.
Holden on the podcast a while back. She was great.
Oh, great. Yep. Yeah, yeah. I've done a lot of work with her and really enjoyed hanging out. When I was working with Assist and then president of the board of directors for Assist for a year. I worked with Jan she was the head of the Journal Near Death Studies. And I helped as the editor of some of the journals, a guest editor, where we were publishing the conference articles that came out of the conference that we would hold as Assist in the Journal of Near Death Studies.
Oh,
So I did a
nice.
bunch of work
Great.
with her.
Hmm.
Um, Other books that I would recommend, obviously, I mentioned Nan Bush's Dancing Past the Dark. Um, you have Spiritual Awakenings by Barbara Harris Whitfield. Another one that Dancing with God Through the Storm, Jennifer Elam, and another classic. So those are all really story oriented, their personal experiences, and looking at that. So I'd highly recommend those. Another seminal work, which I would recommend that isn't just on near-death experiences, but on this whole topic, the whole area, is Stan Groff and Christina Groff's work. Spiritual emergency, when personal transformation becomes a crisis. And they've written a couple different books, but their work has really been important. And they started another organization, the SEN, Spiritual Emergency Network. That's really great. For those who are more theologically oriented, Religion, Spirituality, and the Near-Death Experience by Mark Fox. That's been an interesting to read.
Nice.
Religion, Spirituality, and the Near-Death Experience gets into different theological principles of oneness and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, nice. One guy I would mention is Eben Alexander, who
is
a
Eben Alexander's work.
neurosurgeon who had his own near-death experience, and so he can relate to his own experience, plus give the science of how does the neuroscience connect, or maybe where does it fall short? It can't explain everything.
Yep, and Sam Parnia's work as well. I think he wrote a book. I think it was called Actual Death Experience, ADE. But he talks about the resuscitation science and working as a ER doctor for many years and his history with studying near-death experiences. He actually has written a number of books. There are also a number of chapters, for example, in books on transpersonal psychology, or there's a handbook of anomalous experiences. I want to say. It's back up there behind me. I'd have to get up and look at it. But there's a lot of chapters as well that are really good from these individuals.
Yeah. It's great how much research has been done, and again, like we mentioned earlier, because of a technology and how it's improved in resuscitation, now we're having a lot more people with near-death experiences.
Yeah. Another caveat I guess I should give is that I haven't read a lot or acquired a lot of books in the past 10 years, other than Yvonne Kason's, and I think really I was a reader for her book before she published it, so that's why I have her work. But with academia, I kind of pulled out of academia and kind of have gone more into the clinical world since 2015, and opened up my private practice, and have been doing that. And so I haven't been keeping up on the research piece of it. And so for those of you who are researchers looking into this topic, check out the new stuff too.
I'm sure there's always more interesting and updated stuff to look at. And that's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And the most recent thing I've heard is Sam Parnia's work. He actually had a person verify his random number generator in one of his ERs. Okay. So he was able to verify that a person, during a cardiac event when they were trying to resuscitate, he accurately said what the numbers were and what there's a second target up there that they have to see if they're up and out of their body. Wow. Supposedly he reports on that. So I would check that out too.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, well, thanks, Ryan. This has been really great, really educational, but also love to focus on the heart and the message and what this means for us all.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Kendall, for having me on. I really had a lot of fun and enjoyed, as always, talking with you and presenting whatever knowledge I can for the listeners.